What if the frail old woman everyone dismissed, the one sent to a sterile room to fade into memory, was once the most feared figure in a world that operates in the shadows? What if her quiet life of sacrifice was merely a pause, and fate was waiting for one final chapter? Eleonora Vance felt the question hanging in the antiseptic air of the Golden Years retirement villa, a place where life was measured in pill schedules and lukewarm tea. The walls were a placid beige, a color designed to soothe, but to her, it was the color of surrender. For 78 years, she had been a storm, a secret, a queen beside a king. Now, she was just a resident, number 2B, a case file with notes on her fragile hips and occasional forgetfulness. The staff, young and earnest, spoke to her in the sing-song cadence reserved for toddlers and the very old, their kindness a smothering blanket of condescension. A young orderly, barely 20, with a smug certainty in his eyes, had patted her hand that morning. "Don't you worry your pretty little head, Ellie," he'd said, correcting her when she tried to explain that the window latch was loose, a security risk. "We'll take care of everything," he called her Ellie. No one had called her Ellie since she was a child, before she had earned her name. Her name was Eleonora. To a select, terrified few, she had once been known only as the ghost. She watched him walk away, his youth a form of blindness she had once possessed. He saw a stooped woman with hands gnarled by arthritis and a gaze that seemed to drift. He didn't see the mind behind those eyes cataloging his sloppy posture, the way his keys jangled on his belt, the exact timing of the night nurse's coffee break. He didn't see the woman who could once dismantle a man's life with a single whispered word, or, if necessary, with those same gnarled hands. The decision solidified not with a bang, but with the quiet, inexorable force of a glacier calving into the sea. Her granddaughter, Clara, had put her here out of love, a misguided, panicked love after Eleonora had taken a fall. Clara saw only fragility, a beloved grandmother who needed protection. She could not comprehend that the cage, no matter how gilded, was still a cage. That night, Eleonora did not sleep. She lay still, her breathing shallow and even, a portrait of serene slumber. But her mind was a whirlwind of logistics and timing. She charted the guard's patrol, the sticky lock on the fire escape, the blind spot in the security camera's sweep of the west lawn. These were skills buried beneath decades of baking cookies and tending roses, but they were not gone. Muscle memory, she mused, is a stubborn ghost. At 3:17 a.m., during the deepest trough of the night's stillness, she moved. There was no fumbling, no hesitation. Her movements were fluid and economical, the practiced grace of a predator. She wore layers of dark clothing, her meager savings and a faded photograph of her late husband, Bartholomew, tucked into an inner pocket. The loose window latch the orderly had dismissed became her exit. She worked it open with a nail file, the faint scrape of metal on metal masked by the hum of the building's ancient air conditioner. The drop to the manicured lawn below was a calculated risk, but she landed with a jarring impact that sent a spike of pain through her hip. She gritted her teeth against it, a familiar, almost welcome sensation. Pain was a reminder she was alive. She melted into the shadows of the sculpted hedges, a gray specter against the manicured perfection of the grounds. She was free. But she was not just escaping the Golden Years villa. She was going home. The journey back was a pilgrimage through a city that had forgotten her. She took a series of buses, her hunched form and simple coat rendering her invisible among the pre-dawn commuters. The world had grown louder, faster, and more garish in her years of quiet seclusion. Faces were illuminated by the cold blue light of tiny screens, everyone encased in their own private bubble of noise and information. She was an anachronism, a ghost at the feast of modernity. Her destination was Blackwood Manor, the sprawling estate on the cliffs overlooking the sea. The name itself had once been a whisper of power, a place where fates were decided over brandy and chess. Now, as she crested the final hill, her heart ached. The grand iron gates, once polished to a mirror shine, were rusted and chained, a single, stark "no trespassing" sign dangling from them like a death notice. Weeds choked the once immaculate driveway, and the great oak doors were boarded over. Neglect was a cancer that had metastasized across the face of her home. It was a mirror of how she felt, abandoned, boarded up, its history and power left to rot. She found a breach in the old stone wall at the back of the property, a place where the ivy had pulled the mortar loose. Slipping through, she entered a world frozen in time. The formal gardens were a wild tangle of thorns and overgrowth, but beneath the chaos, she could still see Bartholomew's design. The ghost of a white rose, his favorite, struggled for sunlight near a crumbling cherub fountain. Memories assaulted her with the force of a physical blow. Bartholomew, his hand on the small of her back as they surveyed the construction, his voice a low rumble of satisfaction. "This is our fortress, my love. Our sanctuary. A place the world can never touch." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. The world had touched it. Time had devoured it. Inside, the gloom was heavy with the scent of dust and decay. Moonlight streamed through grimy, floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating spectral shapes draped in white cloths. Furniture, once priceless, now stood as silent, shrouded mourners. She ran a hand over a dust-covered grand piano, the one Bartholomew used to play on stormy nights. A single, discordant note echoed in the cavernous hall. She moved through the rooms like a phantom, each step a journey into the past. Here, in the library, they had planned the quiet coup of a South American government. There, on the terrace, they had celebrated Clara's 5th birthday, a moment of pure, untainted joy. Every corner held a piece of him, of them. The house was not just wood and stone, it was the repository of their life, their legacy. And it was dying. She felt a surge of proprietary anger. This was her home. Her fortress. She had sacrificed everything to protect it, to protect the quiet life she built for her family after Bartholomew's death. She had allowed herself to become small, invisible, to ensure the shadows of their past never fell upon Clara. But in doing so, she had allowed their sanctuary to be desecrated. A noise from the second floor shattered the silence. A sharp, metallic scrape. Eleonora froze, every nerve ending firing. She was not alone. The sound was not the settling of an old house. It was methodical. Deliberate. Someone was here, and they were searching. Her body, frail as it was, responded to the threat with an instinct she thought long dead. She flattened herself against the wall in the deep shadow of a tapestry, her breathing slowing to a whisper. Her senses, dulled by the monotony of the nursing home, sharpened to a razor's edge. She could hear the faint crunch of debris under heavy boots, the low murmur of voices. They were professionals, moving with purpose. She ascended the grand staircase, her worn slippers making no sound on the marble. The pain in her hip was a dull throb, but the adrenaline was a potent anesthetic. She was the ghost again, and this was her hunting ground. Peering around the corner of the upstairs landing, she saw them. 2 men in work clothes were using crowbars to pry open the wall panels in Bartholomew's study. And standing in the center of the room, bathed in the beam of a powerful flashlight, was a third man. He was young, dressed in a tailored suit that was comically out of place in the derelict mansion. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his face a mask of impatient arrogance. He held a tablet, swiping through what looked like blueprints of the house. "Find it," he commanded, his voice sharp and entitled. The auction records mentioned architectural anomalies. Vaults. Safes. "I bought this entire rotting pile for what's hidden inside it. Stop wasting my time." Eleonora's blood ran cold. He had bought her home. This preening child, who spoke of it as a rotting pile, thought he owned her life's work. Rage, pure and undiluted, burned through her. She stepped from the shadows. "Get out of my house," she said. Her voice, thin with age, was nonetheless imbued with a command that made all 3 men jump. They spun around, their flashlights catching her in their beams. For a moment, they were just stunned. They saw a confused old woman in a drab coat, her silver hair askew. The young man in the suit, Kean Sterling, was the first to recover. A slow, mocking smile spread across his face. Well, well. Look what the cat's dragged in. Are you lost, Grandma? The local dementia ward must be missing one of its residents, his men snickered. Eleonora's gaze was unblinking, fixed on Sterling. I said, get out. Sterling took a step forward, his smile widening. He was enjoying this. I'm afraid you're the one who's confused. I am the owner of this property. I have the deed, the title, the whole 9 yards. You are trespassing. He pulled out his phone. Now, you can either walk out of here, and I'll forget I saw you, or I can call the authorities and have you escorted to a nice, padded room. Your choice. The threat was clear, his disdain palpable. He saw her as nothing, a nuisance to be swatted away. He had no idea of the forces he was provoking, no conception of the history embedded in the very walls he was tearing apart. He was a fool playing with a loaded gun in the dark. This house has secrets you cannot possibly comprehend, Eleonora warned, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. You are trespassing on more than just property. Sterling laughed out loud, a harsh, barking sound that echoed in the ruined study. Secrets. Oh, I'm counting on it. Now, the police are on their way. Time to go. Ellie, the diminutive name, the same one the orderly had used, was like a key turning a lock in her soul, unlocking a chamber that had been sealed for 20 years. The frail old woman was a facade, and it was beginning to crack. The wail of a siren in the distance confirmed Sterling's threat. Eleonora knew a direct confrontation was foolish. She was outmanned, and in the eyes of the world, she was a confused old woman. Her power had always been in subtlety, in knowing the terrain better than her enemies. And this was her terrain. As Sterling's men advanced, she turned and moved deeper into the mansion, not with the panicked shuffle of a frightened elder, but with a swift, purposeful glide. Don't let her get away. Sterling yelled, his voice laced with annoyance. This is ridiculous. They gave chase, their heavy boots thudding on the floorboards. But they were chasing a phantom. Eleonora led them through a labyrinth of darkened corridors, her memory of the layout perfect. She disappeared through a servant's door, slipped behind a hanging tapestry, and emerged in another wing of the house while they were still searching the first. She knew every secret of Blackwood Manor. The hidden panels, the listening tubes, the passages between the walls. Bartholomew, a man who trusted no one, had designed it to be as much a weapon as a home. From a concealed alcove, she watched them, their frustration mounting. They were bulls in her china shop, clumsy and loud. Just as she was about to slip away to the cellars, a new sound cut through the chaos, the frantic cry of a familiar voice. Grandma? Grandma, are you in here? Please, the police are here. Clara. Her heart seized. Sterling must have found her contact information in the nursing home records. He was using her granddaughter, her only vulnerability, against her. She saw Clara rush into the main hall, her face pale with worry. Sterling met her there, his expression shifting from irritation to one of feigned, solicitous concern. Miss Vance. Thank you for coming. We found your grandmother wandering the property. She's quite confused. She seems to think she still lives here. Clara's eyes filled with tears of relief and embarrassment. Oh, thank God you found her. I'm so sorry. She's not well. We had to place her in care after a fall, and she's been having these delusions. The words were a knife in Eleonora's heart. Delusions. That is what her life, her history, had been reduced to. Clara, her beautiful, brilliant Clara, saw her as a broken thing, a mind succumbing to the ravages of age. The two police officers who had arrived were listening with sympathetic nods. The narrative was set. Eleonora was the senile trespasser, Sterling was the patient property owner. To fight them now would be to prove their point. The pain of her granddaughter's innocent betrayal was sharper than any physical blow she had ever endured. For Clara's sake, she had to appear to surrender. Slowly, She stepped out from the shadows at the top of the stairs. "Clara," she said, her voice trembling, though not from fear. Clara's head snapped up. "Grandma." "Oh, thank goodness. Let's go. These nice men will take us back." Eleonora descended the stairs, her eyes locked on Sterling. He gave her a triumphant, condescending smirk. He had won. He believed he had neutralized the threat. As one of the officers gently took her arm, she leaned in close to Sterling, her voice a barely audible whisper that only he could hear. "You have made a grave mistake." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by arrogance. He dismissed her as a rambling old woman making a final, empty threat. He had no idea he had just been marked by the ghost. As they led her away, Eleonora's mind was racing. Sterling wasn't just a common developer after a quick profit. His mention of vaults and his methodical search of the study, Bartholomew's inner sanctum, suggested he was looking for something specific. Back in the sterile quiet of a temporary holding room at the local precinct, a well-meaning social worker tried to soothe her. But Eleonora was miles away, piecing it all together. The study. The architectural anomalies. There was only one thing of true value hidden in that house, something far more precious and dangerous than gold or jewels. The architect's ledger. It wasn't a single book, but a collection of coded journals, Bartholomew's life's work. They contained the blueprints of their entire operation, the networks, the assets, the political leverage, the quiet sins of the world's most powerful people. In the wrong hands, it was a weapon of unimaginable destructive potential. It could destabilize economies, topple governments, and start wars. She and Bartholomew had created it as an insurance policy, a deterrent never to be used. Its existence was a myth, a ghost story whispered in the darkest corners of power. But somehow, Sterling knew. Or he knew enough to look. Clara's tearful face as she signed the release forms was almost too much to bear. "Grandma, why did you do it? You scared me to death. You can't go back there. It's not our home anymore." Eleonora simply squeezed her hand. How could she explain? How could she tell this girl, whom she had shielded from that life with every fiber of her being, that she was the heir to a secret empire and the guardian of its most dangerous artifact? The drive back to the Golden Years villa was silent. Eleonora looked out the window, but she didn't see the passing streets. She saw the ledger, hidden in its ingenious cache. Bartholomew had been a genius of deception. No one would ever find it by tearing down walls. Its protection was woven into the very soul of the house, a secret only she knew. Her purpose, which had been adrift for years, was now forged into a diamond-hard point. This was no longer about reclaiming a home. It was about protecting the world from her own legacy. Sterling was a greedy fool, but he was likely a pawn for someone far more dangerous, someone who knew the true nature of the prize. She had to get back to the manor. She had to secure the ledger. And she had to do it alone. Her first escape had been an act of desperation. The second would be an act of war. She had been the ghost for longer than she had been a grandmother. It was time to remind the world what that meant. As Clara helped her back into her room, fussing over her, Eleonora was already planning. The game had changed. The stakes were no longer personal. They were global. And Kean Sterling, in his arrogance, had just awakened the one person on earth who could stop him. He thought he was dealing with a frail old woman. He was about to learn that he had broken into the den of a sleeping dragon. Back within the beige confines of her room, Eleonora feigned exhaustion and compliance. She allowed the nurses to fuss over her, taking the mild sedative they offered but palming the pill instead of swallowing it. She needed her mind clear. The system that had seemed so oppressive just a day ago now became a resource to be exploited. She knew its routines, its weaknesses. But she couldn't act alone, not if the stakes were as high as she suspected. She needed an ally, someone from the old life, someone who understood the language of shadows. She needed Silas. Silas, the sentinel, Croft. He had been Bartholomew's most trusted lieutenant, a man whose loyalty was etched in granite. After Bartholomew's death, Silas had vanished, honoring their pact to bury the past and protect the peace they had built. Finding him would be difficult, but not impossible. The architects had built redundancies into everything. Her mind sifted through layers of memory, searching for the key. It came to her in a flash: the public library. A fail-safe communication protocol they had established decades ago, designed for a catastrophic scenario. A dead-drop system, archaic and untraceable in a digital age. The next morning, during the residents' supervised garden time, Eleonora feigned a dizzy spell. As the staff rushed to her side, she surreptitiously slipped a folded note into the pocket of a kindly volunteer, a retired postal worker named George. She'd spent weeks observing him, noting his precise habits and his soft spot for her. "George, dear," she'd whispered, her voice frail, "could you be a love and mail this for me? It's to my old pen pal. I'd be so grateful." The note contained nothing but a call number for a specific, obscure book on 17th-century horticulture at the city's central library and a date. To anyone else, it was meaningless. To Silas, it was a summons. The message was, compromised. Sanctuary under threat. Rendezvous now. All she could do was wait and plan her final escape. She needed to get back to the manor before Sterling's demolition crew could do irreparable damage. The house itself was her ally, her arsenal. Every secret passage, every hidden microphone, every reinforced wall was a tool waiting to be used. She studied the blueprints in her mind's eye, a perfect, three-dimensional model she could rotate and explore. She planned her defense, her strategy, a silent war to be waged in the halls of her decaying fortress. That evening, as she stared out her window, a flicker of movement in the street below caught her eye. A man, standing under a streetlight, looking up at her window. He was older now, his shoulders stooped with age, but she would have recognized that silhouette anywhere. Silas. He had gotten the message. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod and then melted back into the night. The sentinel was back on duty. Hope, a feeling she hadn't truly felt in years, surged through her. She was not alone. The ghost and the sentinel, one final mission. The escape that night was even cleaner than the first. Silas had left a car waiting, the keys tucked in the wheel well, 2 blocks away. Eleonora slipped out during the chaotic shift change, a ghost in the institutional machine. The reunion with Silas in the quiet anonymity of an all-night diner was somber. The years fell away, but the weight of their shared past remained. His face was a roadmap of a hard life, but his eyes held the same unwavering loyalty she remembered. "I never thought I'd hear the signal, Eleonora," he said, his voice a low gravel. "I thought that world was buried with him, a grave robber has come to dig it up," she replied, her voice steady. She quickly explained the situation, the nursing home, the escape, Kean Sterling, and her fear that he was a proxy for a greater threat. Silas listened, his expression grim. When she finished, he confirmed her worst fears. "Kean Sterling is the public face of a consortium led by the sons of our old rival, Dmitry Volkov," he said. "Dmitry died in prison, cursing Bartholomew's name. His sons have spent 20 years rebuilding their father's empire, and they're fueled by vengeance. They believe the ledger is the key to destroying everything we built and reclaiming their family's honor, the Volkovs. Of course. They were brutal, reckless, a blunt instrument compared to Bartholomew's surgical precision. If they got their hands on the ledger, they wouldn't use it for leverage, they would use it like a bomb, incinerating everything and everyone, including themselves, in a blaze of vengeful glory. They think you're dead," Silas continued. "They think the house is just an old ruin holding a treasure. They have no idea the Guardian is still at her post." The words hung in the air. The Guardian. It was what Bartholomew had called her. He was the architect, she was the guardian. "They have Clara's number," Eleonora said, the words tasting like ash. "Sterling used her to get me out of the house. They will not hesitate to use her again." Silas's jaw tightened. Then we make sure they don't get the chance. What's the plan? Eleonora looked out at the rain-slicked street, her reflection a pale spectre in the glass. The plan is simple, she said, a cold fire kindling in her eyes. I'm going home. And I will remind the Volkovs why their father feared the name Vance. I am going to haunt them. They arrived at Blackwood Manor under the cover of a moonless, stormy night. The rain lashed down, turning the overgrown grounds into a muddy quagmire. Silas, ever the professional, disabled the crude security cameras Sterling had installed around the perimeter. They entered through a cellar grate, a route known only to a handful of people, all of whom were now dead except for the two of them. The house was cold and silent, but it felt different now. It was no longer a tomb of memories but a sleeping giant, waiting for her command. Eleonora felt a current of energy run through her, the house welcoming her back. They'd been thorough, Silas murmured, inspecting the disturbed floorboards and damaged walls in the main hall. Amateurs. They're looking for a steel box, a hidden room, Eleonora said with a hint of disdain. Bartholomew was never so crude. She led Silas to the library, the heart of the manor and their operations. Sterling's men had ransacked the place, pulling books from shelves, leaving them in piles on the floor. It was a desecration. But they hadn't found what they were looking for. Eleonora's phone, a simple burner Silas had provided, buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. A photo of Clara, sitting in a coffee shop, blissfully unaware she was being photographed. The message was chillingly simple: we have your granddaughter's schedule. The ledger. 24 hours, the Volkovs were done playing games. They were raising the stakes, putting her family in the crosshairs. A primal fury, the protective instinct of a matriarch, rose in Eleonora. They had crossed a line that should never be crossed. They've targeted Clara, she told Silas, her voice dangerously calm. They are trying to rush me. It's a classic Volkov move, Silas growled. All brute force, no finesse. What do they want? A trade. The ledger for Clara's safety. They want me to bring it to them. It's a trap. They'll take the ledger and eliminate you both. I know, Eleonora said. She walked towards the grand fireplace, her hand tracing the intricate carvings on the mantelpiece. But they've made a fatal error. They believe they hold all the cards. They think I'm a desperate old woman who will do anything to protect her grandchild. She paused, her eyes locking with Silas's in the dim light. They're right about that part. I will do anything. The time for defense was over. It was time to attack. While Silas set up a perimeter and re-established communication with the few loyal remnants of their old network, Eleonora prepared for her visitor. She knew Sterling would be the one to come. The Volkovs would send their pawn to retrieve the prize. She moved through the house, laying her own traps, not of wire and explosives, but of information and psychology. Using the house's old but still functional surveillance system, she began to build a profile of Kean Sterling, monitoring his calls, his frantic reports to his handlers. He was arrogant, but he was also terrified. He was in over his head, and he knew it. The next evening, as the storm raged outside, Sterling arrived, just as she knew he would. He came alone, wanting all the glory for himself. He found Eleonora waiting for him in the library. She was not hiding in the shadows. She sat in Bartholomew's high-backed leather chair, a single lamp illuminating her. She looked calm, composed, not like a frightened grandmother, but like a queen on her throne. "You're making a mistake," Sterling blustered, trying to project an authority he didn't feel. "Give me the ledger, and the girl stays safe." "It's that simple." Eleonora didn't answer immediately. She simply watched him, her gaze so intense it seemed to strip him bare. The frail, confused woman was gone. In her place sat someone else, a figure of immense, ancient power. Her spine was straight, her hands rested calmly on the arms of the chair, and her eyes, once clouded with age, were now sharp and clear as chips of ice. "You speak of things you do not understand," she said, her voice resonant and cold, stripped of its elderly quaver. You are a messenger boy, sent to fetch a weapon you lack the intelligence to wield. Sterling flinched. I'm not. I'm in charge here. No, you are not, Eleonora said, rising slowly from the chair. The transformation was terrifying. She seemed to grow in stature, the weight of her history settling on her like a royal mantle. You stand in the house of Bartholomew Vance, the architect. And you have threatened his bloodline. You have trespassed in the sanctuary of the ghost. The name hung in the air between them. Sterling's face went white. He had heard the stories, the whispers of the Vances enforcer, a legendary figure so effective, so ruthless, that most believed her to be a myth. That's not possible, he stammered. You're just an old. His voice trailed off as Silas stepped from the shadows behind him, a large, menacing silhouette. The trap was sprung. The ledger is not for you, Eleonora said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the sound of the storm. And my granddaughter is not a bargaining chip. You came here for a treasure. You have found a reckoning instead. Kean Sterling stared into the eyes of the myth he'd dismissed, and for the first time in his pampered, arrogant life, he understood the true meaning of fear. The dismantling of Kean Sterling was not a physical assault, it was a psychological deconstruction. Eleonora circled him like a shark, her voice the only weapon she needed. She recounted details of his life, his secret debts, his betrayals, the corners he'd cut. Information Silas had gathered in a few short hours. She exposed the flimsy foundation of his entire existence, proving that she knew more about him than he thought anyone did. His bravado crumbled, replaced by a desperate, pleading terror. The Volkovs, they'll kill me, he whimpered. Yes, they will, Eleonora agreed calmly. Unless you do exactly as I say. Meanwhile, Silas was executing the second phase of their plan. He fed information directly to a trusted contact in federal law enforcement, not about the ledger, but about the Volkovs' more conventional criminal enterprises, all corroborated by evidence from their own network. He was painting a target on their backs, using the laws of the modern world to neutralize a threat from the old one. With Sterling now a terrified and compliant puppet, Eleonora prepared for the final act. She had him call the Volkov brothers and arrange a meeting, telling them he had the ledger and was demanding a higher price. The location was a neutral, public place, a crowded plaza downtown. The trap was no longer in the manor, it was now in the open. Before they left, Eleonora knew she had to secure the ledger. She walked over to a simple, unadorned bookshelf filled with volumes of poetry. Sterling watched, confused, expecting her to trigger a secret mechanism or pull a false book. Instead, she selected a worn copy of Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, Bartholomew's favorite. She opened it, and from a hollowed-out section in the center of the pages, she removed not a book, but a small, leather-bound data drive. He always said the best hiding place was sentiment, she murmured, a flicker of a sad smile on her lips. No one ever looks for a heart in a house of secrets. The ledger, the key to a global shadow war, was hidden inside a love poem. It was so perfectly Bartholomew. At the plaza, the scene was set. The Volkov brothers arrived, arrogant and impatient, their men positioned around the square. They saw Sterling, and sitting on a bench nearby, a frail old woman they didn't even notice. Silas was a block away, coordinating with the federal agents who were closing in, ready to arrest the Volkovs on charges of racketeering and conspiracy. Just as the brothers approached Sterling, Eleonora made her move. She stood up and called out, "Dimitri's boys." They turned, their eyes widening in disbelief as they recognized the face from old photographs, a face they thought long dead. In that moment of shocked hesitation, the federal agents swarmed in. It was over in seconds. The Volkov Empire, built on brutality and fear, was brought down not by a rival army, but by a ghost, a sentinel, and the rule of law. Her war was won without firing a single shot. The aftermath was quiet. The Volkovs were in custody, their organization in chaos. Kean Sterling, facing his own set of charges, had given a full confession, painting himself as a victim, a narrative Eleonora was content to allow. He was no longer a threat. The world was safe from the ledger. She and Silas returned to the manor as the sun began to rise, the storm having passed. The house was a wreck, but it stood proud against the morning light. It had protected her one last time. Later that day, Clara arrived. She had been contacted by a lawyer, one of Silas's associates, who had given her a heavily redacted version of the truth, that her grandmother had been instrumental in stopping a major criminal organization that had been targeting their family. She walked into the library to find Eleonora not as a frail resident, but as the lady of the manor, directing a cleanup crew Silas had hired. Clara's eyes were wide with a million questions. She looked at her grandmother, truly looked at her, for the first time. She saw the strength in her posture, the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the quiet authority in her voice. She saw the woman who had been there all along, hidden beneath a mask of age and infirmity. "Grandma, who are you?" Clara asked, her voice a whisper of awe. Eleonora smiled, a genuine, warm smile. She walked to her granddaughter and took her hands. "I am your grandmother," she said simply. "And I have always done whatever is necessary to protect my family." In that moment, the gap between them, the chasm of misunderstanding and misplaced concern, closed forever. Clara didn't need to know about the ledger or the ghost. She just needed to know the truth of her grandmother's love and strength. They decided, together, that Eleonora would not be returning to the Golden Years villa. Her home was here, at Blackwood Manor. They would restore it, not as a fortress, but as a home, a sanctuary for their family's future, built on the foundations of its powerful past. Weeks later, Eleonora stood on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The sounds of construction had been replaced by the gentle hum of a house coming back to life. Clara was inside, laughing with one of the restoration architects. Silas had retired for good this time, content that his final duty was done. Eleonora held the faded photograph of Bartholomew, his handsome face smiling at her. She had fulfilled her promise. She had protected their family and their legacy. The world thought Eleonora Vance was just a lucky old woman who had reclaimed her property. They would never know the truth. They would never know that in a quiet war waged in the shadows of a forgotten mansion, a legend had awoken to write one final, triumphant chapter. What if the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone ignores? Perhaps you should look closer at the quiet elders in your own life. You never know what secrets they guard, or what legends they truly are.